My name is Margaret, I'm 67 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. Asterisk, before I tell you what my own son did to me, I need to ask just one thing. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Maybe you, too, know what it feels like to be discarded by the very person you loved the most. This isn't just a story. It's the silent scream of mothers, fathers, and grandparents who were forgotten. And if you feel that kind of pain deep inside, stay with me until the end, because what I found out, it didn't just break my heart, it shattered my soul. Asterisk. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that the son I raised with so much love would throw me out of my own home like I was some kind of stranger. But what I discovered about his real intentions still makes my blood run cold. I need to tell this story before it's too late, because what happened to me could happen to any parent who trusts blindly. It all started 3 months ago, on a Tuesday morning that seemed like any other. I was in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for my family over 43 years, when my son David walked in with a look I had never seen before. There was something cold in his eyes, something that made my heart skip a beat. He was carrying a manila envelope, and his hands were shaking slightly. I thought maybe he had bad news about his job or his marriage, but I was so wrong. What he was about to tell me would shatter everything I believed about the man I had raised. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table without even looking at me. The tone of his voice was different, formal, like he was talking to a business partner rather than his mother. I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to ignore the knot that was forming in my stomach. Something was terribly wrong, and I could feel it in every fiber of my being. "David, honey, what's wrong?" I asked, sitting across from him. But instead of the warmth I expected, he slid the envelope across the table toward me. My hands were trembling as I opened it, and what I saw inside made me feel like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. Legal documents, eviction papers, papers that demanded I leave my own house within 30 days. The house where I had lived for over 4 decades, where I had raised him and his sister, where every corner held precious memories of our family. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I need you to move out," he said, his voice as cold as winter. "I'm taking over the house. It's time for you to find somewhere else to live." I stared at him, waiting for him to smile, waiting for him to tell me it was some kind of cruel joke, but his expression remained serious, determined, almost hostile. This wasn't my son speaking. This was a stranger wearing my son's face. My mind was racing, trying to understand what was happening. "David, this is my house. I've lived here since before you were born. Why would you want me to leave?" But what he said next made my world crumble completely. "Because I need the house for my future, and you're just taking up space." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Just taking up space. That's what I had become to the son I had sacrificed everything for. But I still didn't know what he was really planning. And when I found out the truth, it would be even worse than I could imagine. The days that followed were a nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. David became increasingly aggressive, showing up at the house at all hours, inspecting every room like he was already the owner. He would walk through the hallways with a measuring tape, taking notes, making phone calls, in hushed tones. When I asked what he was doing, he would simply say, "Planning for the future." "Mom, something you should have done years ago." I called my daughter Sarah, who lives in another state, desperate for support. But when I told her what was happening, her reaction shocked me even more. "Mom, maybe David has a point. You are getting older, and that house is too big for you. Maybe it's time to consider assisted living." Even my own daughter was siding with him. I felt completely alone, abandoned by the 2 people I loved most in the world. That's when I decided to fight back. I wasn't going to let them push me around like I was some helpless old woman. I had rights, and I was going to defend them. I contacted a lawyer, a nice young woman named Jennifer, who listened to my story with growing concern. "Mrs. Anderson," she said, "something doesn't add up here. Your son has no legal right to evict you from your own home. There's something else going on." She was right, and what we discovered during our investigation would reveal a betrayal so deep, so calculated, that it still makes me sick to think about it. But I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Jennifer started digging into the legal aspects of my case, and what she found made my blood run cold. Somehow, without my knowledge or consent, the deed to my house had been transferred to David's name 6 months earlier. 6 months, He had been planning this betrayal for half a year, smiling at family dinners, hugging me goodbye, all while plotting to steal my home from under me. How is this possible? I asked Jennifer, my voice barely above a whisper. I never signed anything. I never agreed to transfer the house to anyone, but she explained that there are ways to forge documents, ways to manipulate the system when you know the right people. And David, who worked in real estate, certainly knew the right people. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about trust, about the sacred bond between mother and child. I had given David everything, my love, my support, my life savings to help him through college and his early career struggles, and this was how he repaid me. But the worst part was yet to come. As I sat in Jennifer's office, trying to process this information, she received a phone call that would reveal the true extent of David's deception. What I learned next would change everything I thought I knew about my son and the lengths he would go to get what he wanted. The phone call was from a private investigator Jennifer had hired to look into David's activities. What he had discovered made me feel like I was living in a nightmare. David hadn't just stolen my house, he had already sold it. The buyer was a development company that planned to tear down my beautiful home and build a luxury apartment complex. The sale was scheduled to close in just 3 weeks, and David stood to make over $2 million from the transaction. $2 million. That's what my life, my memories, my home was worth to my son. But it wasn't just the money that made this betrayal so devastating. It was the cold, calculated way he had planned it all. He had been meeting with developers for months, negotiating the sale while pretending to be the loving son who visited his mother every Sunday for dinner. There's more, Jennifer said, her voice heavy with disgust. The investigator found evidence that David has been telling people you're mentally incompetent, that you need to be placed in a care facility. He's been laying the groundwork to have you declared unable to manage your own affairs. The room started spinning around me. Not only was he stealing my home, but he was also trying to destroy my reputation, my independence, everything that made me who I am. I thought I had reached the bottom of this nightmare, but I was wrong. What I discovered next would reveal a conspiracy that went far beyond just my son's greed. As we dug deeper into David's scheme, we uncovered a web of lies and manipulation that involved not just him, but also his wife Amanda, and even my own daughter Sarah. They had all been in on it from the beginning. Sarah's suggestion about assisted living wasn't innocent concern for my well-being. It was part of their plan to get me out of the way so David could complete the sale without any interference. The private investigator had recorded phone conversations between David and Amanda where they discussed how to handle the old woman and make sure she didn't cause problems for their big payday. They talked about me like I was an obstacle to be removed, not a human being with feelings and rights. Amanda even joked about how easy it would be to convince everyone that I was losing my mind. But the most heartbreaking discovery was a text message exchange between David and Sarah. "Don't worry," David had written. "Once we get her into that nursing home, she'll forget all about the house, and we'll be set for life." Sarah's response was even worse. "Good. She's been a burden for too long anyway. Time for us to think about our own futures. A burden." That's what I had become to the children I had devoted my entire life to raising. The children I had worked 2 jobs to support. The children I had sacrificed my own dreams for. But what hurt the most was realizing that this betrayal had been brewing for months, maybe even years, right under my nose. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Jennifer assured me that we had enough evidence to stop the sale and prosecute David for fraud, but the emotional damage was already done. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't stop thinking about all the signs I had missed. The way David had been asking about my finances lately, his sudden interest in my medical appointments, the strange questions about whether I had updated my will. But the most shocking discovery was a series of photographs showing David meeting with developers and real estate investors, not just in recent months, but going back almost 5 years. This wasn't a sudden decision born of greed. This was a long-term plan that had been in motion since my husband was still alive. David had been waiting for the right moment to strike, and Robert's death had provided the perfect opportunity. The final document in the box made my blood run cold. It was a copy of a new will that Robert had secretly prepared, leaving the house not to David and Sarah, but to a charitable foundation that helped elderly people fight against elder abuse. But what I found next would give me the power to turn the tables on David completely. Part 9, hidden at the bottom of the safe deposit box, was something that would change everything. A signed confession from David himself. Apparently, Robert had confronted him years ago about the financial irregularities, and David had broken down and admitted everything. He had signed a detailed confession, thinking that his father would keep it secret to protect the family. But Robert had kept it as insurance, knowing that someday it might be needed to protect me. In the confession, David admitted to forging my signatures, stealing money from my accounts, and planning to force me out of my home to sell it for his own profit. He had even written about how he planned to have me declared mentally incompetent if I tried to fight back, reading his own words, in his own handwriting, describing how he viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to his wealth, was devastating. But Robert's final surprise was yet to come. Along with David's confession was a letter from a lawyer, explaining that Robert had already taken legal steps to protect me. He had created a trust that made it impossible for anyone to sell or transfer the house without my explicit written consent, witnessed by 3 independent parties. David's forged deed transfer was completely invalid, and the sale to the developers could never go through. Armed with this evidence, Jennifer and I prepared to confront David and his coconuts. But what happened when we revealed the truth would shock even me, and I thought I had seen the worst of my son's betrayal. Part 10. We arranged a meeting at Jennifer's office, telling David we wanted to discuss a settlement. He arrived with Amanda, and a smug expression on his face, clearly thinking he had already won. Sarah joined by video call from her home in another state. They all looked so confident, so sure that their plan had worked perfectly. If only they knew what was waiting for them. David, Jennifer began, we have some documents we'd like you to look at. She slid the confession across the table, and I watched as his face went from confident to confused to absolutely terrified in a matter of seconds. Amanda leaned over to read it, and her face went pale. Sarah, watching from the video screen, started crying. Where did you get this? David stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. This was supposed to be destroyed years ago. That's when I spoke up for the first time since he had tried to evict me. Your father kept it to protect me, David. He knew what kind of person you really were, even when I refused to see it. The next hour was filled with tears, accusations, and desperate attempts at apologies. David tried to claim he had changed since writing that confession, that he only wanted the money to provide for his family. Amanda blamed him for dragging her into the scheme. Sarah insisted she had only gone along with it because she thought it was what was best for everyone, but their attempts at damage control were too little, too late. The evidence was overwhelming, and the betrayal was complete. Part 11. Jennifer presented them with their options: face criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse, or agree to a settlement that would make things right. The choice was simple, but the consequences would be severe either way. David would have to pay back every penny he had stolen from me over the years, plus interest and penalties. He would also have to cover all my legal fees and sign a restraining order preventing him from coming near me or my property ever again. But the most painful part was yet to come. As part of the settlement, I demanded that David and Sarah both write letters of apology, not just to me, but to be published in the local newspaper so everyone would know what they had done. I wanted the whole community to understand how they had treated their own mother, the woman who had given them everything. The letters they wrote were pathetic attempts to minimize their actions and shift blame, but they were published nonetheless. The community response was swift and devastating for David's reputation. His real estate business collapsed within weeks as clients refused to work with someone who would steal from his own mother. Amanda filed for divorce, taking their children, and moving back to her parents' house. Sarah lost her job when her employer learned about her involvement in the scheme. Watching their lives fall apart should have given me satisfaction, but instead, I felt only sadness for what our family had become. The children I had loved unconditionally had destroyed themselves through their own greed and betrayal. Part 12 today. 6 months after this nightmare began, I'm still living in my beautiful home, surrounded by the memories of happier times. The house that David tried to steal from me is more precious to me now than ever before, not because of its monetary value, but because it represents my strength, my independence, and my refusal to be victimized by those who should have protected me. I've used some of the money David was forced to pay back to make improvements to the house: new windows, fresh paint, and a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. I've also established a foundation in Robert's memory to help other elderly people who are facing similar betrayals from their own family members. Unfortunately, my story is not unique. The saddest part of all this is that I lost my children in the process of saving my home. David moved to another state after his business collapsed, and I haven't heard from him since the settlement was finalized. Sarah sends me a Christmas card each year, but we haven't spoken directly. I gained my independence and my security, but I lost my family. But here's what I want every parent watching this to understand. Your children don't owe you anything, but they don't have the right to destroy you either. Trust, but verify. Love unconditionally, but protect yourself. And never, ever, let anyone make you feel like a burden simply because you've grown older. The house David wanted so badly is still mine, and it will remain mine until the day I die. After that, it will go to the foundation that helps other elderly people fight for their rights. David will never see a penny from this house, and that knowledge gives me more satisfaction than I ever thought possible. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we love most, but that doesn't mean we have to let them destroy us. But this story doesn't end there, because 3 weeks ago, something happened that I never could have predicted. I was tending to my garden, the same garden where I had taught David and Sarah to plant their first flowers, when a young woman approached my front gate. She was probably in her early 30s, with dark hair and nervous eyes that reminded me of someone, though I couldn't place who. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "Are you Margaret Anderson?" When I nodded, she took a deep breath and said something that made my heart stop. "My name is Emily. I'm David's daughter from his first marriage, the daughter he never told you about." The words hit me like lightning. A granddaughter I had never known existed. Emily explained that she had been searching for our family for years, ever since her mother died and left her with questions about her father's side of the family. She had finally tracked down David's address, but when she went to see him, she discovered he had moved away in disgrace. Neighbors told her about what had happened with his mother, and she felt compelled to find me and learn the truth. "I need to know what kind of man my father really is," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "I need to know if the blood running through my veins belongs to someone capable of such cruelty." What I told her next would reveal yet another layer of David's deception that even I hadn't fully understood. As Emily and I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where David had delivered those devastating eviction papers, I learned about a side of my son that was even darker than I had imagined. Emily told me that David had abandoned her and her mother when she was just 5 years old, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibility of fatherhood. He had promised to stay in touch, to send money for her support, but after a few months, he disappeared completely. "My mother worked 3 jobs to support us," Emily said, her voice breaking. "She never remarried because she was too busy trying to be both mother and father to me. She died believing that your son might someday come back and want to be part of my life." The pain in her voice was unbearable, because I realized that while I had been giving David everything he wanted, he had a daughter out there who was growing up without a father. But Emily's story got even more heartbreaking. She had tried to contact David several times over the years, when she graduated high school, when she got married, when she had her own children. Each time, he had rejected her attempts at reconciliation, sometimes cruelly. The last time I called him, about 2 years ago, he told me to stop bothering him with my sob stories and that he had moved on to a better family. A better family. That's what he called Amanda and their children, while completely dismissing the daughter he had abandoned. But what Emily told me next would reveal that David's pattern of abandonment and betrayal went back much further than anyone realized. Emily had done her own investigation into David's past, and what she discovered painted a picture of a man who had been lying and manipulating people his entire adult life. Before he married Amanda, there had been another woman named Lisa, whom he had also gotten pregnant and then abandoned when she miscarried. He had borrowed thousands of dollars from Lisa's family, promising to pay them back, but disappeared instead. "There's more," Emily said, pulling out a folder she had brought with her. "I found records showing that David has been involved in several other real estate scams over the years. You weren't his first victim, Grandma. You were just his most vulnerable one." The word grandma made me cry. Here was this beautiful young woman, calling me by the title I had always dreamed of hearing, while my own son had tried to destroy me. Emily showed me documents proving that David had defrauded at least 3 other elderly clients in his real estate business, convincing them to sign over their properties and then selling them for his own profit. He had managed to avoid prosecution in those cases by settling out of court and moving to different states, but the pattern was clear. David was a predator who targeted vulnerable people, and I had been his ultimate prize. But what Emily had discovered about David's current situation would shock me even more than his criminal past. "Grandma," Emily said, "I need to tell you something else about David. Something that might change how you feel about everything that happened." She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of news articles from the city where David had moved after his business collapsed. The headlines made my blood run cold. "Local man arrested for insurance fraud. Real estate developer faces federal charges. Family man or con artist." David had been arrested just 1 month ago for attempting to burn down a commercial building he owned, trying to collect the insurance money. But the fire had spread to a neighboring apartment complex, and several families had been displaced. 2 elderly residents had been hospitalized for smoke inhalation. The man I had raised was now facing federal charges that could put him in prison for 20 years. "The worst part," Emily continued, "is that Amanda and their children are now homeless. She's been staying in shelters with the kids, trying to get by on welfare." When I contacted her to ask about David, she broke down crying and told me everything. She said she wished she had never met him, that he had destroyed her life just like he destroyed yours. I should have felt satisfaction knowing that David's greed had finally caught up with him. But instead, I felt sadness for those innocent children who were paying the price for their father's crimes. But Emily had one more revelation that would tie everything together in a way I never expected. "There's something else you need to know," Emily said, reaching into her purse. "Before my mother died, she gave me this." She handed me an envelope with my name written on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. "She wrote this letter to you, but she never had the courage to send it. She wanted you to know the truth about David, but she was afraid you wouldn't believe her." With trembling hands, I opened the letter and began to read. Emily's mother, whose name was Jennifer, ironically the same as my lawyer, had written a detailed account of her relationship with David and the way he had manipulated and abandoned them. But the most shocking part was her warning about what David might do to his own family someday. "Mrs. Anderson," the letter read, "I'm writing this because I believe David will eventually turn on you too. He has no loyalty to anyone, not even the people who love him most. He sees relationships as transactions, and when people are no longer useful to him, he discards them without a second thought. Please protect yourself, because I fear that someday you will be in the same position I found myself in, alone and betrayed by a man who was supposed to love you unconditionally." Jennifer had been right about everything. She had predicted David's betrayal years before it happened, and she had tried to warn me from beyond the grave. But as I finished reading her letter, Emily told me something that would change both of our lives forever. "Grandma," Emily said, wiping tears from her eyes, "I didn't just come here to learn about David. I came here because I need family, real family, and I was hoping that maybe you might want to be part of my life and my children's lives." She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures of 2 beautiful little boys, ages 6 and 8, with bright smiles and curious eyes. "These are your great-grandsons," she said. "They don't have any grandparents in their lives, and their grandfather David doesn't even know they exist. But I thought maybe, if you were willing, you could be the loving grandmother to them that I never had." The pictures took my breath away. Those little boys looked exactly like David and Sarah had looked at that age, before greed and selfishness had corrupted their hearts. I looked at Emily, this brave young woman who had tracked me down not for money or revenge, but for connection and love, and I made a decision that filled my heart with hope for the first time in months. "Emily," I said, "I would be honored to be your grandmother and their great-grandmother. You and your boys are welcome in this house anytime, and I want to be part of your lives in whatever way you'll let me." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had gained something instead of just losing everything. David's betrayal had cost me my relationship with him and Sarah, but it had also led me to discover Emily and her children. Sometimes, life takes away with one hand and gives back with the other, and I was finally ready to embrace the gift I had been given. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, a story can heal more than 1,000 words.